and welcome to yet another tutorial. This tutorial is not going to be as short as the ones previously. This is going to be a little bit more code heavy because mostly the solution that I've come up with is using GDScript. There are better ways to do it. There are probably other ways to implement this within the features in the engine, but this is the solution that I really like because it's very simple compared to what it does. Sometimes when you edit your level, you don't want to drag and drop objects and put them directly into the map. So in order to avoid that, another way of doing that is actually to edit the tile map itself. And here I'm going to just exemplify how this works, and then we are going to play with it. So I have my tile set in here, which has the sprites that I can play with. I can place these tiles, and when I play the game, those tiles get converted into the actual objects. You can see that they are interacting the way that I intended. Also notice that in here I also have a variance to those objects, so the objects get instantiated with their particular variable. In this case there's only one box scene, and it also has a variable indestructible or not. If it's not destructible, it's one of those red boxes. If it is indestructible, then it becomes this one. But essentially they are not two separate objects, they're one single object with other variables. The same applies for the monsters. You can see that one goes vertically, this one goes horizontally, and also this one is already dead. So those variables are being set by the mechanism which takes the sprites, takes the tiles and puts them into the game world. So let's get into it. The first thing that I need to do is to have all my tiles, actually all my objects as tiles. In this case I have the player spawner, I have a checkpoint, I have a goal for the game. There's also the box, the indestructible box, horizontal moving monster, vertical moving monster, and the dead monster. These are the states that the objects can be, and these are pretty much the tiles that I want to add into the game that get created into objects that will become the objects in the game itself. If I export it like this, and it looks pretty much like a horizontal strip. In particular, I prefer to have it as a very long horizontal strip because we are going to use the X position of this tile in order to select which object it actually is. This is going to be more relevant soon enough. Now that I've exported this tile set, we can see the tiles, they are exactly how exported. As I said, I want it to be a horizontal strip. There's no problem if you pack them. If that's something that you prefer, you'll need to make a small change. You're going to see soon what that change actually is. So first of all, I need to add this to my tile set. So I'm going to select my tile map, select my tile set, add a new tile, Atlas, and you can see here that it requires a texture. So let's add a texture. I put this texture, I say yes, this is going to create my tiles, right? So now I have the tiles. One specific thing I need to do is going to rename this tile in a particular way so we can recognize them. I am going to call it objects, like this. This is going to be useful to recognize that this is the ID which represents the tiles themselves, because you're going to see that these IDs do not really correspond with their position in the list of tiles. For example, I can have here 6. See, there's no problem, I can totally have 6, although this is the third in the row. But in game, this is going to be represented by ID 6, so these are ID 6 tiles. All the objects that I'm going to add are going to be added in here, so you need to really take care when you add new tiles, or if you delete tiles, to not clash with everything that you've done before, because that's going to just make stuff crazier. I'm going to leave the ID 6 for exemplification to make the script relevant shortly. Now, in order to make this very easy, I'm going to actually create a component which I will be adding into the level itself. So I go here in my utils, I create a new scene. I'm going to make it a 2D scene because I want, after I go through the whole tiles, to add the objects in this scene. So it needs to be a 2D scene, so it has a position and everything else. I'm going to call this scene TileMap parser. Yeah. I'm going to also add a script to it. So scripts. I prefer them to have separated. Okay, so we don't really need ready and we don't need process either. We do need to have a way to refer the TileMap itself. So I go like this, oops, export TileMap, and this is a TileMap, and I'm going to also add a setter function for this in particular. So set new TileMap, okay, like this, TileMap, equals new TileMap, and also when this gets set, it also calls a function which does create objects for us. Create objects. Okay. So let me create the function. Okay, so now I will just print creating objects, run the game and see what actually happens. Also, I'm going to delete my objects that I already have on my map. So I'm just going to delete all the objects and we are going to replace them with the objects directly in the TileMap editor. So I deleted these. Okay. I'm going to also delete the player spawner as well, because this is going to get handled by the parser itself. Now I take my TileMap parser, I drag it in here. I need to make sure that this transform is at 0. And when I click it, I see that it has a property TileMap, so I need to assign the TileMap. I'm going to drag the TileMap in here, rearrange it so the TileMap parser is after the TileMap. And I see this, and I play. And I see in my debugging, I have creating objects in here. So that means the TileMap parser now has access to the TileMap itself. So let's test that and say TileMap and see what happens there. Awesome, we can see that we do indeed have the TileMap itself. Now let's go into the TileMap and we need to add a new layer. That's because if we go here and we paint, we also see that everything else gets destroyed, and that's because we are currently drawing on layer 0. So I need to add a new layer for this specifically. So I go here in layers. I will name this a map to make sure that, well, this is the map, but I'm going to add a new layer and I'm going to call this the same name, objects, right? So I try to have the same name so we can identify that later on. And now if I go back to my TileMap, I select the objects layer, I can place stuff like this. I can put a box in here, I can put a monster, I can put a dead monster in here, more boxes like this, some indestructible boxes. Oh, this is bad, this can be like this and something like this. Okay, so I can place objects, but if I do play, if I press the arrow buttons, nothing happens because these are not objects, they're actually just tiles, so we need to replace them. Now if I go back into my script, here in the TileMap parser, first thing I need to determine the layer ID. So that's layer ID, and I'm going to create a function, get layer object, get object layer. So this function is going to provide me with the layer ID of this layer, right? And we need to identify that by some name. So I'm going to add an export. Oops, export var, that should be objects layer name is objects. And now I need to identify the layer itself. So we have some functions that help us inside the TileMap. We can see here we have a function called get layers count. So I'm going to use this function for a layer ID in range TileMap, because we are using the TileMap, get the layer count. And well, now we need to take the name of this. So if how do you take the name? Well, if we go here, we have get layer name, so we need this function. So if oops, I need to interrogate the TileMap. So if the TileMap get layer name of layer ID equals with the name in here, I'm going to actually return the layer ID like this. And let's print that on the screen when that happens. So let's play. And you can see we get layer ID 1. We don't really care what ID it is, we successfully got it, and we can use that later to actually get the tiles. In order to get the tiles, we need to use another function, and this function gives us all the cells which use that particular ID, and we use this function, get use cells by ID. We can provide the layer and then the source ID. This is the ID of the tile itself. Remember, this one in here. First of all, I'm going to iterate through all the cells. Notice that the function does provide an array of positions. So that goes for each cell position in TileMap and get used cells by ID. We provide the layer ID. And the source ID, well, that's 6 because we know it to be 6. And now I'm going to print the cell position. Delete this, run it, and we can see several coordinates which represent the coordinates of these cells in here. But we need to have a better way of determining this 6. That's kind of weird, right? It's just guessing the value, and that's not a good way of doing it. So I'm going to create a function get tile ID, and first of all we need to take the tile set from the tile map. So tile set is tilemap.tileset. Now that we have the tile set, we can determine the amount of tiles that we have. And we do that doing by this. And also I'm going to call this function in here. And also return, so we focus on that just on that one only. And we can see we got 3 tile sets, sorry. That's because we indeed have 3 tile sets. So let's do a for index. Remember, this is the index, is the position in the list, not the ID itself. In range. And now we need to have a way to determine the ID. So ID equals tile set get source ID of this index. All of these functions are actually available in here in the tile map under the tile set, and we see the functions in here. We have get source count, and also we get source. We don't need that, we just need the ID like this. Now we return back to our script. For each ID I'm going to do it first to test and do it like this. So that would be tile set get source by that particular ID, and I will need the resource name. And we see something gets printed in here, but only one of them has the name object, so we need to use that. So that means if the resource name equals the object's layer name, then we return the ID. And I'm going to print the value that gets returned by this function. And now we can see that we successfully got 6. So I'm going to save this in a variable. And instead of using 6 in here, I'm going to use the tile ID. And now we see we still got the coordinates. Now that I have the cell positions, I need to interrogate the tile map for the coordinates in the atlas. So how this works, we have our atlases in here, and all of these cells, they actually have coordinates. If we go in the tile set, in the setup, we can see that all of the tiles have some atlas coords. See? The same goes for any other tile set. And we will need these coordinates to determine which cell it actually is, because the IDs in this one, it actually is a set of multiple stuff in the same time. So in order to do that, we take the tile map and we get cell atlas coords. We provide the layer ID and we provide the position. I'm going to also print this information directly to the screen so we can see what happens. And now we see that instead of the coordinates of the position on the map, we see the atlas coordinates, right? In my case, I'm going to just use the x coordinate of the atlas because, as I stated earlier, I want my texture to be horizontal, and that makes each object get represented by the x position in the atlas. So the first object has a coordinate of 0, the next one has a coordinate of 1, and so on and so forth. If you have multiple rows in your atlas, then you're going to use some formula to actually determine the coordinate, or you can use this one as a key later on, but I'm going to focus on just using it as a horizontal map. So I'm going to save this variable as object ID, and as I stated, just use the x value. And now I'm going to use a function which adds the object by the ID. So add object by ID. I need to provide a position where to put the object and also the object ID. I'm going to make the function position ID, and I will just print creating object at of type. I also need to convert this into strings. Oops. This. And now I can see that the script created an object at this position of this particular type. We are going to replace this code with some kind of mapping in between this type and put an object respectively to this position. In order to do this very modularly, I'm going to create a new scene for this in particular. Create new. This is going to be a scene which doesn't need to have position, I just need to have a script inside of it. There's probably a better way of doing it, but this is the best solutions that I know of. I'm going to call it object mapping, and this object mapping also has a script. I'm going to add a class name to it, and it only has one variable, mapping, which is also dictionary. I'm going to add a key for 0, that would be the player, and firstly I'm just going to add a string in here, player. If I go in here, I have my coordinate for the box to be 3, so that would be a box. 4 would be a metal box. This one, the monster is 5, that's 5. Horizontal monster, vertical monster, and for 7 I think, yes, that's a dead monster. Now I go back into my parser and I need to have a way to actually set the object mapping. I'm going to set the object mapping before this variable, so when the tile map gets set and we get into this function, the mapping is already being set by the object itself. So I go like this, object mapping, this is an object mapping. And in my function here, I'm going to just take the map first, so that would be object mapping.mapping, and I'm going to print the map on the screen and see what happens. And we get an error. Why is that? Because in the level I also need to add, in the TileMap parser, sorry, I need to add the object mapping first. So let's drag it into the scene first. Here it is. And now I put it in the object mapping. If I run again, we see that the map, it gets written in the console. So I'm back in my TileMap parsing. Right now I have my ID, and in it and I need to print the string in here represented by ID. So I'm going to do it like this. So if map has the ID, I'm going to print this, and instead of ID I'm going to say in here map. I have an error accidentally, I used the wrong way of doing it. I need to use this accessor for the map. Also get works as well. And now we can see that where we should be creating an object at this position of this player box, horizontal, and so on and so forth. So instead of that information, I'm going to have this mapping equals the map and the information in there. I'm going to do the same thing, and we see that works. But instead of having this information in here in the object mapping, I'm going to add a dictionary which has a scene. And in this scene, I'm going to preload the actual resource for the player spawner in here. Where is it? Not assets, scenes, player spawner, right? And I delete this. And I do the same for everything else. Box in here, box in here, monster in here. Here, I have a typo in here. And now instead of printing the string, I'm going to instantiate this particular scene. So I get back in here. First of all, I'm going to test if the mapping has a scene. Does it have a scene? If so, I take the scene and I create a new object. Create new object is new scene, instantiate. Hopefully I spelled it right. Now I need to also set the position of this object, and that would be the position we take in here. You're going to see there is a little bug in there. And add this as a child. New object and play. And let's see what happens. And we see everything got stuck in here. Look at the poor mobs. What's happening? The coordinates are not the coordinates they should be on the map. They are the coordinates they are on the tile map. And each cell in here is 16 pixels. So I actually need to multiply that by 16. So oops, not in here. I need to multiply that by cell size. And we need to actually export this so we can configure it later. Export cell size, and that's 16. And now we see that objects actually the monsters started from here, right? So this means that we go through the tile thing and then we do all these changes, but there is a problem. We still see the tiles, so we need to remove that layer. After we go through all the objects, we should do like this: TileMap, clear layer, and the layer ID. And now we can see that we successfully cleared everything else. Awesome. Now we need to provide the data to the monsters and to the boxes themselves. In order to do that, I'm going to add another entry in my dictionary here. So I put a comma. This would be data. Let me actually format this in a better way, like this. Okay, like this. And the data is also a dictionary. And we say we need to provide, oh, the player spawner doesn't need any kind of data. I am sorry about this, but the box does. So put a comma in here. Let me break this like this. Okay, data and indestructible. Okay, and we set this to false. Oops. I'm going to copy paste this entry. Arrange it a bit like this. Data, now this is set to true. And we do the same with the monsters as well. First arrange the code a bit. And add some data. Okay, like this. Okay, but the monsters have move in here set to 0 and move set to 2, and this one is dead and is set to true. It doesn't really matter what their movement is. If I play, of course, nothing happens. They don't respect these variables. In order to do that, I need to get here back. After I create my object and I put the position, I need to see if the mapping has data. If mapping has data, then for each entry in my mapping data, I'm going to first just print the entry. Oops. So yeah, entry name is entry. I'm just making sure that that thing is right, and it has a value of mapping data.get, and that's entry. And if I play, oops, we need to change this to a string, of course. And now we see that each object has some particular variables that need to be set. In order to do that, I will simply just take the new object, set, the name of the variable is entry, and the data is this mapping.data.getEntry. So we are taking the information from the dictionary and providing it to the object. And if I play, we can see that the monsters don't respect that. I think I messed up the name. It's movement. See, my bad. Movement, because that's the name of the variable inside the monster, right? And now we can see the monster is respecting that movement. I really hope you found this useful. This was a more technical tutorial, and that's because we have all this getting the information from the tiles themselves, correlating that data with the entry in the dictionary, and then taking the data from the dictionary to set the variables in the objects, and that's a little bit more complicated. If you have questions about it, don't forget to leave them in the comments below. If you did find this useful, don't forget to like, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!